Thanks to everyone who is here for joining us today. This discussion around SDR hiring practices and aligning some expectations. My name is AJ Alonso. I head up marketing here at Demand Drive, and I'm going to moderate / facilitate the discussion today. Really going to leave it up to Ben and Shawn on the panel to kind of run with things. But here I am, just nudging them along, asking them questions, and hopefully we're going to get some good discussion out of it. So I'm just going to give a quick intro as to why we're here, why people should care about this webinar. Realistically, it's all because the role and responsibility of sales and SDRs in particular have changed over the past few years. Buyers have changed, so sales has had to evolve alongside with it. It's not all about spray and pray anymore. It's all about using consultative selling and guiding prospects down the funnel through storytelling and with data and doing more than just booking a meeting with someone. And because all of this has been happening over the past few years, it means that the way that we hire these SDRs has to change as well. So not only have buyers evolved and sales reps evolved, but the hiring practices associated with these sales reps have to evolve alongside with them. And today I brought on Shawn and Ben to talk about some of those changes. And they're responsible for hiring processes within their own companies, so they are more than equipped to answer some of the questions I have for them today. I'll have you guys introduce yourselves actually real quick. Shawn, I'll start with you. Tell people a bit about yourself.
What's up, everybody? So Shawn Harrison, the Director of Recruiting over here at Demand Drive. I actually moved into the Director of Recruiting role at Demand Drive about 3.5 years ago, just right towards the end of 2017. And I actually was previously was hired actually as an SDR for Demand Drive in 2014. So actually my day-to-day and responsibilities was being an SDR for those first 2.5 to 3 years here at Demand Drive, and then just kind of organically transitioned and started taking over the recruiting director duties over here at Demand Drive.
Awesome. Ben, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So Ben Stephenson, I run sales development at SmartBear Software for North America. So SmartBear has a suite of tools that helps developers and companies build and develop their software. So we are headquartered right in Assembly Row in Somerville. So pretty cool spot to be, but we do have international offices in Galway, Melbourne, a couple other offices around the US as well. So about 700 people and still growing. So our team keeps growing out. It's definitely a pretty fast-paced, accelerated program, which is great. Certainly comes with some challenges that I think tie into this conversation as well. But yeah, I get to work with a lot of really cool customers. Honda, Adidas, Google, Microsoft, JetBlue, Pfizer, to name some. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion. I'm not entirely sure how I actually have the credibility to be on with Shawn and AJ here, but
you definitely have more credibility than I do. I'm not really involved in the hiring process at all, but here I am facilitating the discussion. So I think you'll be just fine. Some of the questions that we're going to cover today and some of the topics are really going to be around the expectations gap that we have between what we look for in an SDR to actually be successful in the role and what maybe some of the hiring managers and job descriptions look like from 4-ish years ago that are still prevalent today. So a lot of the stuff around skills and traits that SDR should be possessing, how Shawn and Ben run interview processes, what they expect from new hires, and what the future is going to look like. So I'm going to have them pull out the old crystal ball and tell us what hiring is going to look like in the next 2, 3, 4+ years. And it's all going to be based on how they've sort of shifted their processes and used changes to build teams. So credibility abounds.
Yeah, hopefully it won't be over entirely over Zoom in the next few years as well.
Fingers crossed. Before I jump into question one, just a bit of housekeeping for everyone. This is being recorded. I'm looking at the little recording button up in the top left. It is blinking red, so that's a good sign. So if you do have to hop off early, that's totally fine. We'll make sure to send you this recording. And the structure of the event is going to be about 45 minutes of discussion between myself and the panel, and then the last 15 dedicated to Q&A from you, the audience. So I have Alex Ellison manning the chat. He'll take note of your questions as they come up during the conversation and save them for the Q&A, or if it's particularly specific to the current discussion, he'll interrupt us. Alex, feel free, just put me on mute and tell me to shut up and ask the question. And we'll be good to go.
Don't worry, I will.
Thanks. All right, without further ado, I will kick it off with question number one. And Shawn, I'm going to start by asking you this question, and then I'll get your opinion as well. But we talked a bit about, the different traits that you are looking for in an SDR candidate and how they've changed over the past like 3 to 5 years. What are some of the top things that you look for an SDR should really focus on building as they look to apply for SDR positions?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And definitely over here at Demand Drive. So over the course of the last few years too, as everything's kind of evolved. And even I know Alex, when he was kind of promoting this event, the webinar today, just kind of talking about his experience, years ago, kind of going through that interview process. And I'll say back a few years ago at Demand Drive, it was there, I guess, one thing, I guess how I want to describe it is almost like, we almost were looking for like robots almost in a way, right? And I think that's almost in a way how kind of the SDR mentality back several years ago was like, we want people who are going to pick up the phone, dial, give us numbers, give us that quantitative just numbers, right? Where now it's totally transitioned more so into this consultative approach, doing the smart work, collaboration with your coworkers, with your managers, with your project team, specifically at Demand Drive. So over the last several years, what Demand Drive and what we've really kind of identified as our core values and how we're, really measuring you guys coming in for, interviews, from all the way, from when you're submitting your initial application, all the way through the onboarding stage. You guys are being evaluated in everything you do, right? Every interaction, every email, every LinkedIn message, every phone call, everything we're doing, we are constantly, looking at you guys and trying to evaluate you and find the right people. But the three major core values that we really, I call them the 3 C's over here at Demand Drive. First one, we'll call it coachability, curiosity, and then communication. So those are the 3 kind of core values that we're looking at you guys through those lenses. And just kind of like some examples, right? So, pulling up my notes here. So for example, right? So coachability, right? So you're coming to the interview, all right, or you're prepared, right? So you clearly understand, can clearly define, state what that role is, what the company does, right? Why you're here. So that that coachability, right? Demonstrating leadership qualities. You're confident, right? Aren't really showing or illustrating any sort of nerves or anything like that. So the confidence, clear, concise, concrete answers, and very easily you're going to be able to relate a lot of your past either work experience, education, extracurricular activities, and be able to try and relate that to the job and the company that you're applying for specifically. Right? Curiosity, that's a huge one in this, right? New technologies constantly emerging. Your manager, fellow peers, fellow SDRs, you're going to be constantly put on the spot. You're going to, have spontaneous adjustments or like new tasks. So things are really ever changing kind of in this day-to-day role. So having that natural curiosity to ask the right questions, to do the right things, right? Are you proactively, subscribe to maybe some publishings, that can further develop you as a sales rep? Maybe you have entered or completed a SDR boot camp or course or whatever it is. Maybe you're actively reading some, literature on sales, personal development, self-growth, whatever it may be. We want to hear and learn about those things that you guys are actively doing to prepare yourself for this type of role and gain, trying to gain that tech, that B2B tech sales experience. And then also communication, right? And that starts literally as soon as you submit your application, right? So that even is going to be attention to detail, spelling, grammatical errors on a resume, if that's the case. Also, every single engagement with a recruiter or a hiring manager at Demand Drive, right? So emails, professional, non-spelling errors, the grammatical, it's well structured. Also, as well as, sorry, I just lost my train of thought, but it's going to go through the entire process, right? So when we're meeting you guys, having that confidence within the interview, knowing what you're talking about, you've come prepared. So we're going to look at those 3 C's really kind of through those lenses. And Ben, I'll even kind of like leave it to you. Is there, I know I think have very similar kind of ideal customer profile or ideal candidate profiles when it comes to, hiring and bringing on these SDRs. So do you want to just touch on maybe some of the things that either overlap or maybe some of the other things that you guys look at over at Smart Bear?
Yeah,
Shawn,
absolutely.
my moderating job here. Wow. I don't have to do anything. I love it.
AJ, would you like to reframe that for me, or should I just?
No, go
I'm
for
good.
it, man.
Okay.
What are,
All
yeah,
right.
what are you
Well,
looking for?
yeah. Yeah. So I think I agree with everything that you just said. Coachability, huge. I think we'll get into that a little more as far as when we're talking about like interview questions and whatnot. Confident must have. I think we talk about like resiliency and grit and picking up the phone. I think that's still as important as ever. It's just not a differentiator. So like if you can't come and sit down and make calls, and if you can't sit down and come and bang out emails, yes, there are other things you need to do too. But I don't think you can ultimately be successful if you can't show that you can do some of those things within your control that come down to resilience and come down to grit. It's just not something that's going to set you apart because you have to have it. It's an expectation, not something that's going to help you stand out from the crowd. I think along with confidence, just being articulate in that first interview is huge because when I'm having the conversation, I'm wondering to myself, can this person hold their own talking to someone who is higher up in an org chart around a topic, especially for us, if it's around software development, where they're not going to know as much as the developer, engineer, or architect they're talking to, can they hold their own? So I think that's huge. Natural curiosity, completely agree on that too. I think active listening is big during the interview process as well, as far as traits that I look for, because that translates directly to sales. So again, I think we'll get into this more when we're talking about the actual questions that we like, but being able to show that you're actively listening to what the person on the other end of the conversation is saying versus just nodding along and then going to the next question is really, really important, because if you try to do that on a sales call and you're just thinking about the next thing to say, you're going to miss really important small details that can make or break whether you push the deal down the funnel or once you're in a closing role, if you're able to close that deal as well. So I think those are really big. I also tell people like time management and organization, that should really be a strength for SDRs now, because to your point earlier, AJ, it's not like you're not just sitting there making calls. There are other things that you're doing as well. So you have other projects piled on you, admin work, etc. Being able to organize your day and figure out what works for you is really important. And then finally, I think one of the biggest things is empathy as well. So I think we'll talk about this a little later on as far as the customer service aspect of the role and why having that background can be important. But to understand where the customer prospect is coming from and being able to have that empathetic approach and putting your customer service hat on, even when maybe that person's overreacting or not correct, that is a must have if you want to be successful, but also stay sane while you're doing the role. As well. So I think I would add those other things on top of what Shawn said.
For sure. Yeah, I think what you guys brought up really lends itself to, again, sort of the whole point of all of this is like the skills and traits that you're looking for in SDRs and candidates as they apply really directly relate to like how we want to buy things as buyers. Like if I'm a prospect and someone reaches out to me because I don't know, I went to a webinar, for example, and they're like, hey, you came to our webinar. I'd love to tell you more about our product. You can either do that in a way that, Ben, to your point, is very like resilient focused, grit focused, like you're one of 1,000 people on a list that I have to get through today. And you're all low hanging fruit and I can just kind of lop away at the tree until somebody falls into my basket. Or I can actually take the time to listen, to empathize with you, to understand your situation and guide you through this process. And personally, and I think a lot of people would agree that like the latter is how people buy things today. And you don't want to just get peppered with incessant sales messaging. And it really kind of boils down to like the traits that you notice during the interview process and what people portray themselves as when they inbound to you guys and you're going through that process. They matriculate all the way through. And if you have those traits when you're interviewing, you probably have those traits when you're actually doing the job. So you want to look for them early and often rather than maybe try to build them and have them develop them while they're actually doing the SDR role.
And just one other thing I just wanted to add as well is being able to identify, and I know we talked about like your strengths, right? Like what are your strengths? I think one of the biggest things too is more so really looking at like if you guys can identify your weaknesses, right? Like as a person, things to improve, right? It doesn't, I know what weaknesses, just it has that negative connotation, right? But we're kind of trying to look at it through the scope of like, how can we further develop those weaknesses to make them a strength, right? So if you guys yourselves have that self-awareness and know that you're going to have, maybe some challenges, right? Actually, we'll probably dive into, I'm sure, with some kind of the questions that you asked, but definitely like being able to identify those weaknesses of yours, but how you can combat those, and eventually, and how you're actually trying to proactively turn those into strengths.
Yeah, that's huge. Both of you brought it up a couple of times during the last question, so I'll shift into looking at the resume of an SDR. This is a great opportunity for you to highlight those skills, those traits, some of the past experiences you've had, and how they lend themselves to transitioning into a sales development role. So I'll ask Ben to start with this one, because I asked Shawn first last time. How important is the resume really for an SDR candidate, and what should you be highlighting on that now that maybe you weren't highlighting a couple of years ago?
Yeah, and I think Shawn can probably hit some basic tips here, just because he's going to review more resumes on the front end than I am, because a lot of times when the resume gets to me, it's been vetted to some degree. But I think being able to highlight any sort of customer service experience that you've had, even if it wasn't necessarily the main part of the job, anything you can tie back to one of the skills that we were just talking about, the better. Ultimately, I don't think you need to have had 2 years of a sales job or a sales internship. If you can do that, great. There's things, again, that you can control, the boot camps, taking some like online certifications and whatnot that I think Shawn's going to get into as well. But making sure that you can tie back this experience to interacting with people, whether it is over the phone, whether it is in person, door to door, whatever it is, I think is really important. And then, yeah, I think as well, just making sure, Shawn, I'll let you hit the intangibles just because you probably deal with that more than I do.
Yeah, no, I think just kind of going off what you were saying, Ben, right? Like the resume, you guys are essentially what the resume is we want, it should be you telling your, basically a timeline, right? A timeline of events. Tell us your story, right? So it's that kind of personal growth story. But just like Ben was saying, right? I think something really important too is certainly as Demand Drive's growing, Smart Bear is obviously a good sized company as well. So we're going to be getting more and more applicants and candidates. So it's really like, how are you going to stick out, right? So one of the biggest things and one of the biggest disclaimers is a 4-page long resume, triple spaced, things like that. So definitely just the overall structure, format of the resumes. Try to keep it as best as you can. 1 page, right? No spelling errors, grammatical errors. Those can be, disqualifiers as well as having your contact info, LinkedIn profiles, social profiles, or websites, maybe where you're doing projects, blog posts, or writing, anything like that. But definitely what Ben kept kind of honing in on is being able to tie it back to the company and the job that you're applying for, right? So definitely highlighting that customer service, right? So even though, which I think we were actually touching on kind of before the webinar started, we're talking about, a potential candidate, right? Maybe you were doing landscaping or carpentry or something, when you were 15, 16 years old in high school, right? If you're going to put something that on your resume, make sure that you're highlighting that kind of customer service aspect or things that you were doing on the job that can relate to the SDR position, right? So everything, we want it to be kind of tied into why you're here in front of us, interviewing for this SDR role for this company. So I think the biggest thing is really just like that kind of stricter format of keeping it a page. You definitely, I know you can fill all your information and tell your story in that page, but making sure that it's all relatable to the job that you're applying for.
You said 4 triple spaced. I almost had a heart attack.
Trust me, you'll still see some pretty extraordinary resume format. So.
Yeah, I think in that same vein too, once you've built up enough experience that you can list out like 3 things, you can stop going back to sophomore year of high school when you babysat or something like that. Once you have the couple internships or an entry level job, or whatever it is, stick with those couple most important things versus getting onto a 3rd page listing out every single thing you've done. Because especially in Shawn's seat, if he and his team are reviewing hundreds of resumes coming in, just you have to think about it from his perspective. He can't spend 10 minutes per resume looking through. So you just got to do what you can to keep it brief and to the point while also highlighting what you can bring to the table.
A question that I thought of while you were both talking about this is one of you brought up the idea of like not personal brand, but like the idea that the resume kind of brands you as a candidate. You know, you can take a look at it, quick glance, really understand this person's backstory, what kind of skills and traits they have that they can bring to the table. A lot of the discourse in the sales world right now for SDRs is around the idea of building up your LinkedIn profile so that you can build a brand online and you become that sort of like resource and whatnot for external outbound sales. But at the same time, like you're building up this LinkedIn profile and it acts like a resume for you. You know, it has all of your past experiences. So do you maybe see some candidates who aren't focusing so much on the resume because they have well built out LinkedIn profiles, or do you maybe, I don't know, is the resume dead for this world?
So I get
Yeah,
no, great question, AJ. And I think one of the things that actually you'll notice is the people, right, and the candidates and the applicants, whoever it may be on LinkedIn, right, the ones who have those personal brands more so built out, right, more connections, more proactive with what they're doing on LinkedIn in terms of networking, things like that. It's actually funny because you'll find that those people with the most built out personal brands on their LinkedIn profiles actually tend to have the better kind of structure formatted type of resumes. So I think it's almost directly correlated because I think essentially it all comes down to kind of that attentional detail and trying to tell your story. So, I think, but that's definitely like a great place to start as well though. Like, if you have that great resume and you look really good on paper, continue to develop that and build those personal brands on, things such as LinkedIn or wherever it may be. Because that's only going to increase your exposure and as well as, networking to find those opportunities that you're really looking for.
Sweet. Let's jump, I guess, ahead during the process. You've examined the SDR candidates' traits and taken a look at their resume. The next step, obviously, on your guys' end is to set up an interview and actually get to know them. Interview processes have changed a lot over the past few years. I know, Shawn, you brought up Alex's LinkedIn post about his process at Demand Drive. Similar for me, mine was a very different hiring and interview process 8 years ago than it is now. I think the questions and sort of what you guys look for during that entire session have changed dramatically. So Shawn, I'll start with you. What are some of the favorite questions that you ask during that interview to really tease everything you need to know about this SDR candidate out during that session?
Yeah, no, and just to start too, I think so the process of Demand Drive, right, especially like the actual interviews. So one thing that we've really kind of changed and kind of developed as it's evolved here at Demand Drive is basically the structure of the interview, right? So you're going to, for an interview at Demand Drive, you're going to meet with always myself, but always at least 2 other managers, sales development managers. So literally potential for this person who's interviewing to be your direct manager if we end up, offering and hiring you here as an SDR. So we love to have those managerial style interviews where at least 2 managers at Demand Drive are going to pick your brain. They're going to ask you questions, but also get to know you and learn about the things that make you tick, right? So, and that always, right, that's going to come down to those kind of 3 C's that I mentioned at the beginning, right? So a manager, especially at Demand Drive, they're going to want a coachable rep. They're going to want someone who's curious, proactive, and they're also going to want someone who's a strong communicator and articulate and concise and confident with, everything they're saying. So some of those kind of just like actual like individual kind of like tailored questions for some of you guys. Obviously, one of the biggest things is like your why, like telling us your story and your why, like why are you here interviewing at Demand Drive? So can, kind of coming down to that preparation, like, do you understand both the business model of Demand Drive and also the SDR role? So we're also going to ask you things of, your past experience, whether it's at work. So, what were the biggest challenges, in your day-to-day at your previous workplace, right? Maybe you are green. Maybe you're a really, really green candidate. Maybe you don't have a lot of experience. So we're going to look at the things on your resume and your LinkedIn profiles and your social profiles to see what kind of interests you guys have. And then that way we're still going to be able to ask you questions, maybe more centered around the things you're passionate about and what you have done. but how it's relatable to this job at Demand Drive, right? So like for an example, if you have, maybe we have a candidate who just graduated, right? Maybe they're upcoming grad here in May 2021. Maybe they were either in a fraternity or a sorority, right? So we could try and dive into, okay, so like what was the recruiting process for you as an incoming freshman into school to earn your spot in this sorority or fraternity, right? And now, after 4 years of being at that school, now you're, about to be an alumni. You're, job hunting, looking to get your foot in the door in that first sales organization. We might tailor some questions to be like, okay, so how would you pitch your fraternity or sorority right now as an alum? What was your pitch maybe as a freshman or a sophomore? How did you recruit, younger, newer incoming freshmen to join yourself? So we're going to try and ask you about your interest, what you're passionate about, if you played a sport in college, or even in high school or whatever it may be. What were those things that that allowed you to grow individually, not only within that sport, but also personally? So what were the things that you really, really loved about football? Does that transfer over to sales? Right. So everything, we're going to be constantly kind of like trying to nitpick, put you guys on the spot, ask you some kind of spontaneous questions as well. If you could go to dinner with any two celebrities or just any two people ever, dead or alive, who would those people be and why? So, right, that's going to help us kind of further identify like what you guys are interested in, what kind of makes you tick, what are the things that you're, looking to accomplish, things like that. So, yeah, I guess kind of is that kind of covered, or do you want kind of like more specific type questions?
So yeah, I think it really speaks to the idea that like the interview process isn't just vetting somebody to understand whether or not they can do the job, but whether or not
Right.
you can feel comfortable managing them and working with them as they do the job.
Right.
That's like
yeah, and AJ, no,
overlooked.
I think that's part of the growth of just Demand Drive, the company and the business as well, right? Everything has become so much more collaborative. So bouncing ideas off of fellow reps. So that's why we really want those kind of team-oriented style players, especially here at Demand Drive, because everything, you're gonna have buddies, SDRs that you're working right alongside. So that collaboration, that team building, that team orientation, like we really have kind of developed almost like a family type atmosphere at Demand Drive, where it's a very competitive, intense type of position, right? Because every single person here at Demand Drive, you're going to have your own individual goals, individual metrics, numbers to hit, kind of on a daily basis, essentially. But it's also within that team setting, right? So we want those players who, work well in a team-oriented environment, but also, can kind of put their head down when they need to, and really kind of lead by example, rather than, maybe being a verbal leader or something like that. So.
Cool. Ben, what about you? What kind of questions do you grill your interviewees with?
Grilling is a good way to put it. Yeah, so I can definitely share a couple things that, one, I think are just like good tips. Like if you do this, you're going to stand out, at least to me. And so I would assume to a lot of other people as well. And then a couple like go-to questions I have and just, yeah, a couple other things. Again, grill is a pretty accurate term. So tying back to the empathy piece, because I try to have a question that ties back to one of the values or traits that we're looking for. So around the empathy piece, I think it's a lot of times I'll try to dig into a specific example when you've had a difficult conversation with a customer, a prospect, individual, whatever it may be, and hopefully some sort of a customer service, customer facing type role. What was the situation? How did you handle it? What did you learn from it? Would you do something different the next time around? I think that also just shows that you've had the experience doing it. It shows that you have that customer-centered, empathetic mindset and approach, which is really important. Another thing I will ask a lot is, and this kind of goes around to, we touched on it a little bit, but I'd say another thing I look for is creativity and just being proactive in general, right? Like there's going to be a lot going on. There's no way that I have all the best ideas and that we're doing things the best way. So I love it when we hire people who can say, hey, you know what? Like, I think we could tweak this, or I could do that better. Or I have this idea, because it's going to make the whole team better. It's going to make my job better. It's going to make me look better if you come up with a great idea. So like those are the people that I definitely want on the team as well. So I'll ask about, and again, these are all like, can you give me specific examples? Part of that is to see how quickly you can think on your feet too, because the quicker you can think on your feet, again, I think translates directly to having conversations, especially with higher up people that you're calling into or talking to. So asking a specific time you've identified an inefficiency or something that wasn't working well in a previous role and what you did about it. Like, did you pitch that to management? What was the solution you came up with? How did you go about getting that implemented, and what were the results from that? So that's something that I'll look for a lot. I think another big thing just as you're interviewing is to show that you're actively listening. So this ties back again to what I was talking about earlier on, is how that translates to sales. So everyone's going to come with their canned questions. Good, you should be prepared with questions, but to take it a next step further, you should also be showing throughout the conversation that you're listening to what I'm saying and asking follow-up questions to the things I'm talking about. Just like if you're on the phone with a prospect, you know you have some qualification questions you have to get to. You got to check the box on a few things, but you're not going to get to the actual meat of what's going on if you aren't listening and asking appropriate questions based off what the person is saying. So if you ask a question around, I don't know, how are the teams lined up? Are they lined up by geography or product or whatever? And I give you the answer, oh, well, we're lined up by territories. Asking like one layer deeper of either, oh, can you explain to me this? Or what do you mean by that? And getting me to talk more, that just, at least to me, is going to show like, okay, this person's paying attention to what I'm saying and can process that information and then have a good question afterwards. And then, yeah, I think around coachability, sometimes I'll ask people during the interview if I can give them feedback to see their reaction. So if someone was using a certain filler word a lot, or maybe didn't answer questions like overly smoothly, whatever it may be, I'll ask them on the interview, oh, can I give you some feedback, and give them that feedback. And their reaction tells you a lot. If people are like really excited about it and are like, yeah, oh God, thank you so much, love getting feedback, then great. That's like a good sign, because that's going to be a big part of the job. If people are like offended or pulled back a little bit, then
try to give me feedback.
Yeah, then right, then that's like a bit of a red flag. So that's something I like to throw at people as well. And then, yeah, I think really ways to stand out is asking proactively for feedback, I think can be good on the call. Asking if there's any hesitations, red flags on your part about continuing this conversation, however you want to word it, that's a good route to go as well. And then asking what next steps are, making sure that you have another date or time or understand the process. So again, that translates directly to sales. Anytime you're talking to a prospect, you got to have a firm future commitment, Sandler term, on the calendar, to make sure that whatever the first conversation was, that carries over. So asking me, okay, Ben, like what are next steps from here look like? You get the answer. All right, and when should I expect to hear back from you? And getting those things that make me commit to you that we're going to get you an answer at a certain time. And then, yeah, if one of like the biggest things, if someone proactively closes me on a call as far as like why I should hire them, and you'd be shocked at how few people actually do this, that to me is like automatically like move to the next round, or like let's talk about like really seriously considering this candidate. Because again, you have to close in sales, and even though you're not closing a deal in an SDR role, you're still closing the person on having to take a next meeting, and someone's time is certainly very valuable. So it in itself is a close. So anyone who proactively does that and is like, hey, here's why I think that I'd be a great fit for your company, and gives me a reason, like awesome. If when people don't, a lot of times I'll ask them why I should go with you over someone else. We're getting flooded with resumes. And for that, I think just be prepared with something compelling. I think to Shawn's point, yes, you need to be able to lean on examples of your baseball captain in high school, whatever it might be, but it can't just be that. Like if your answer is like, I played sports in high school, or your answer is my mom or my dad is in sales, so I think I'd be good at it. Give it a little more thought, come up with something a little more personalized, and just think of how many other people are giving those exact same answers. How many people were captains or played sports in high school? How many people's parents are in sales? I mean, my mom's an accountant. I'd be an awful accountant, so I'm not sure whether that is relevant anyways. But the more you can make yourself stand out with answers like that to end the call, I think that's like what really will push a candidate over the top for me when I'm talking to them.
Yeah, and that's almost like exactly what you're doing in the role anyways, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
saying, if you're an SDR and you can proactively tell a prospect why your solution is going to bring them value, that's going to go way further than kind of just waiting for them to maybe suggest next steps. And if you can come up with that value proposition of like, why should you hire me? That's the same way that you're going to come up with a value proposition of why should you take a call with me and my AE about our software. Obviously directly related, the skills are going to translate really well. And like you mentioned before, you have to personalize it. Like if I'm a buyer today and someone's coming at me with a canned approach that I know they sent out to 100 different other people in my position, it's going to look a lot different than if someone reaches out to me with a specific call out of a challenge that maybe I posted about on LinkedIn, or something that people like me, marketing directors, they've helped in the past in ways that they can bring that to the table. Totally different conversation than just, hey, you head up a sales team. You need this piece of software. Let's have a conversation. So I think that preparing for an interview and having a good interview is like you said, almost directly related to how well you're going to do in the job. And if you can find that early, great. And if you can't, then that's a different conversation to have.
Yep, definitely.
The what I just talked about, the fact that SDRs have to, and I say have to because I fully believe it, you have to cater to the process that the buyer is going through during their buying process. Now they're, like I said, injecting themselves deeper in the funnel than ever before, and they need to be guided rather than sold to. The role is becoming more complicated. It's not an easy thing to do. As an SDR, if you're, talking to these candidates who are 22 years old, right out of college, might be their first ever real job. It's a difficult position to put them in. It's not just putting someone in front of a phone and a computer and telling them to make 150 calls anymore. It's a lot more involved than that. So I would say the role is more complicated than ever, and now it's becoming more competitive than ever. So are we maybe expecting too much from an entry-level role? Ben, I'll start with you on this one.
I just rambled. Kick it over to Shawn.
All right, Shawn, I'll start with you on this one.
No, yeah. So I think so. I guess here. So in terms of like the expectations, right? I think it's actually been so. Although the role, right there, I think there's more things, right, that you need to accomplish or do kind of in this role. And I think this actually kind of goes back to what I was saying of like almost looking for like robots, right? Like get behind the computer, dial, send some emails, right? Where now, and especially at Demand Drive, the way we have evolved as a company, right? Because this SDR role is being just basically become, it's very tedious. You're doing a lot of legwork, right, for the closers within your company, or obviously, the client company or whatever it may be. But I think one of the biggest things is definitely the expectations of Demand Drive, right, for you guys, but also knowing that we have lifted our expectations from a training development type of standpoint, right? So that's what I tell a bunch of recruits, a bunch of candidates, because we hire a lot of you guys fresh, first job right out of college. And so we pride ourselves at Demand Drive in the training, nurturing, and development of sales reps, right? So that's why when we're kind of, previously we've been talking about the interviews and looking at those intangibles of the individual rather than maybe the quote unquote experience, because we trust our training and development process, that if we get the right people on board and in here, that we're going to be able to develop them into a successful SDR.
Ben, what about you?
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree with all that. Realistically, yeah, my expectations are probably higher than they should be. I think that's something that I probably need to make sure I check. We hire a mix of people straight out of school. We also have a lot of luck with people who maybe have a year of experience in recruiting or solar sales or construction sales, something like that, but they want to switch into the booming tech industry. So they'll make the jump over and then work their way up here. So I think that that's something that needs to be balanced as well, as does this person have previous experience or not? If they have a year or two previous experience, you expect them to pick up on things faster, certainly like systems and processes and things if they've been exposed to it. If someone's coming straight out of school, yes, I think sometimes you got to remind yourself like, okay, maybe they haven't used this tool before. Take like a deep breath and make sure that they have the training they need. But I think the biggest thing is just having the training and processes like built out and documented that is, if companies aren't doing that, it's an easy thing to do. It's like a must have. If you can give something that is, whether it's video or in writing with screenshots, just like, okay, anytime you have a question on, here's our workflow in Salesforce or Outreach or HubSpot, whatever it is, refer to this, so that you can, if you do have a question, circle back to it. Those type of things I think are must. The tech stacks that companies have continued to expand. So the ability to give feedback, whether it's on emails, if you're using Outreach or SalesLoft, whatever it is, and being able to see open rates and reply rates and what's working and what's not. Gong or Chorus to listen to call recordings, because those tools are in place, it helps people get up and running and get real-time feedback and have that be continuous as well, where I think that also bumps up the expectation that you can get up and running faster because those tools are there. Whereas if you look back 5 or 6 years ago, a small percentage of companies would have had some of those tools, and now the majority of established companies that have the budget to do it have at least some of those tools in place that really help sales reps in general, but especially entry-level people who need that continuous feedback.
Yeah, it's almost like both sides have kind of risen up a bit over the past few years, where it's like expectations have increased. Yes, we fully expect SDRs to shift how they go about prospecting and sort of guiding prospects through their funnel. But at the same time, the companies that are succeeding, and some of the names that you mentioned there, Ben, like those are great examples of companies that not only provide amazing technology, but also have proven that they've risen their game in terms of the training and onboarding process and the continuous coaching and learning, so that their SDRs are getting the resources they need to rise up to that expectation level. It's unfortunately not as common as we'd like to think, but a lot of companies are kind of realizing that, like, okay, if I expect my SDRs to fully shift the way that they go about the job, I need to meet them at most of the way there and give them the resources to be able to do that, rather than just expect them to know what to do immediately.
Yeah, and I think the continuous feedback loop, I think, is so important on both ends. We've implemented like a mentorship program at Smart Bear, so every new SDR gets aligned with an account executive, most likely someone who started as an SDR themselves and worked their way up to the program and now has become successful in the account executive role. So we launched that somewhat recently, maybe 2 quarters ago, and so far the account executives get a lot of actually like reward and satisfaction out of giving back, which is great, makes it a lot easier. But the SDRs, it's just great to have that person to lean on. And then another thing that we've put in as far as continuing to get feedback is anytime an SDR holds a meeting for a rep, a meeting rating email will go out, and the sales rep will send back rating that email on a scale with feedback as well, and that's all documented in the system. So you can see your improvement. You get real-time feedback after the meeting as far as like, okay, like here's where this one fell short, or here's what I did well on this. So I think having the tools and programs in place to just continue to make sure that there's not gaps in feedback is really important.
Awesome. Shawn, I saw you had something to say about that.
Yeah, I was going to. I mean, basically, just expanding on what Ben said, just in terms of like the resources available, right? So like the expectations are definitely higher, but think over the last several years of all like the infinite amount of resources, whether it's online or the tools that we have invested in at Demand Drive to make the SDR's job that much more easier and being allowing them to be efficient, right, in that job. So that way you can actually do more of what you're supposed to be doing, but in a quicker, more efficient manner. The unlimited resources, also touching on like similar to Demand Drive, right? As we have grown from when AJ started, when there was probably like 10 or 15 people at Demand Drive, right, where there were and I was like the 15th or 20th employee. So at that time, we were all SDRs, we were all on the marketing team, we all were like project managers, we all did some recruiting and interviewing. So the way the company has evolved, right, just like Ben was saying over at Smart Bear, where those mentorship programs. So as we have grown and scaled as a company, all that's done is allowed us to have those different types of promotions, management type of roles, team lead roles. So extra resources, not only all over the internet and online, but at Demand Drive at the company, the amount of resources is only going to continue to grow. So being able to reach out to a team lead or a senior SDR, or a project manager or honestly, even the CEO of Demand Drive, Lindsay Fry, who is still, heads up our sales team at Demand Drive. So it really kind of all starts from kind of the top of the food chain here at Demand Drive, where we still have our two co-founders and CEO that are still so heavily involved in the day-to-day operation. So it makes it actually, kind of enjoyable, right? To join this type of company and culture and environment where you have that support system around you at all times.
For sure. All right, let's wrap up this discussion with one big final future-looking question. I asked you guys to prepare the crystal balls before we started. So based on what you've seen over the past few years, the two of you, in terms of like what's evolved in terms of hiring processes and sort of like expectations from SDRs, and knowing what it was like before that time, how do you think we are going to change in the next few years? So look ahead at like 2022, 23. What is a typical process for a company going to look like who's searching for an SDR? And then for the SDR who's actually applying as a candidate? Ben, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, sure. I think for the SDRs who are applying to be candidates, I think the biggest thing that you should be looking for at now or over the next few years is the companies really have a clear career path. And I think that's also what needs to change in the company's part. You'll hear a lot of companies say like, yeah, we can get you into an SDR seat in X amount of time. That's great on paper, but is there actually the structure in their program to actually move you up there? I'll talk to a lot of SDRs who are maybe coming over from a company where they were an SDR for a year and they said like, well, I was told it was going to be 12 months and now there's no growth for me. So I think as a candidate, that's something that you should be digging into when you're having these interviews, as far as what does that career progression actually look like? And as a company, making sure that the career progression is a real thing, because that's one of the most, especially for an entry level role where the pay is going to be not huge differences between different companies. So what the company has to offer a lot of times is that career progression. I think you have to be able to give real examples. Like I said at the beginning, Smart Bear has like a really accelerated program. We do it in 6 to 8 months, move people from SDR to sales, which is really fast. That's not something I've done at past companies. It has been more of like that year timeline. And there's some reasons for that. Like our sales managers are really hands-on. So when you move up to sales, you still have like a lot of support. You're not on your own. If that wasn't the case, 6 months wouldn't really be realistic. But like we have it very detailed and outlined as far as like, here's what you're going to do to move through the program. But I think one of the biggest advantages is when an SDR interviews with us, they'll talk to someone in the program or someone who has just moved up. And I can give them dates like, Grace started X date, 6 months later, literally on the 6-month mark, she got promoted to an AE. So I think companies need to build that track record so that then they can actually share those like actual success stories and don't just say 6 to 8 months, but people are in the seat for 18 months, actually being able to have those examples and have it be transparent that like, no, this is possible. Here's what we're committing to you. Obviously, if you're successful, no guarantees.
Cool. I like that. I love the formality of it and just like the, open and consistent communication. I feel like a lot of companies don't do that. They like the SDR role is so shrouded. Like you said, it's like, oh yeah. Like AE in 12 months, no problem. And then they just like never do anything. I think it was Corporate Bro. He tweeted out a while ago. It was like SDRs always say like, if I'm not getting promoted in 6 months, I'm just going to do the same thing over at a different company. It's like they just hop from company to company with incremental pay raises and the promise of promotion, but it never comes. So having a well-built program, I think, is definitely beneficial for both parties. I would agree with you there. Shawn, what about you? What are we going to do in like 2 years when it comes to recruiting and hiring people?
Basically just going to say like Ben basically like covered it all, but I think that's one of the things is like Demand Drive's organically growing right now. We've gone through and actually are still in the midst of it, but a rapid growth spurt. over 120% growth, since the beginning of 2020. So one of the things that we need to do, right, is kind of like what Ben was just touching on. But it's also going to organically happen as we're continuing to grow, is more and more of these future career opportunities within Demand Drive are just going to continue to open up for you guys. So being that SDR, so trusting that career path, and that as we grow, like I said, it's only going to organically continue to expand, and being able to promote you guys internally, get you on those growth tracks and those career tracks, that you've been eyeing, maybe for a number of years, that you're working towards, right? So I think it's just kind of the balance of both, right? Like having those expectations as an SDR, we want to know like what is the path that you do want to go down? Like where eventually do you want to go personally and individually? I think one of the things we do really well at Demand Drive is being able to kind of provide some of those kind of custom growth tracks. Not everybody is kind of interested in that same path. So over here at Demand Drive, we're trying to kind of come up with those different kind of customizations to, retain our top employees, but also being able to provide you guys those future growth opportunities as well.
Yeah. So not just moving up in sales, but maybe into marketing or human resources or whatever it might be.
Yeah, whatever it may be, maybe, or obviously like Greg Camerata, for example, at Demand Drive, having those kind of more actual like account executive or sales roles for actual Demand Drive, rather than maybe a client program or something like that.
Right. Very cool. Yeah, I look forward to that day. I know a lot of people who kind of scrape and claw their way through the SDR position to ultimately get to where they want to be in life, and maybe it's 2 years or 3 years later than they expected, but you come out the other side stronger.
Basically, if you rewind about 14 months ago, kind of the beginning of COVID-19, I would have guessed like we might in 2023 like get to 150 employees, which we're at right now. So it's definitely the last year has definitely been a blessing in disguise for us at Demand Drive, as we've gone through this crazy, really rapid growth spurt, which is, it's a great problem to have, but right, like we're still as an organization, we're trying to, kind of combat some of those challenges that we're facing, but obviously doing the best we can, and looking to provide all you guys with those opportunities that you're looking for, and continue to build that reputation, credibility, and just kind of culture environment of Demand Drive, right, AJ, where when there was like 15, 20 of us in that small one room office, just being able to maintain and kind of sustain the same culture, core values, environment, whether we're at 150, 200 employees, or, just the same as we were when we were 15, 20 employees. So
yeah, it's tough. I think, and just to add to the sort of future state conversation before we take a couple of questions here, I think the coolest thing I've seen pop up recently that I think will continue over the next few years is the idea of these like micro communities, boot camps, sort of like online resources available for SDRs to not just like learn from their colleagues and peers, but from one another outside of their own company. So SDRs at other organizations, or even SDR managers. A lot of companies that have really built in these communities and boot camps and stuff into their training and hiring process, are able to not just like build up top talent, but retain it because they have this connection with this community and it's from this company. So I don't know, I think that's a big thing that's going to happen over the next few years. Personally, as someone who is very involved with online sales communities, I don't see them going away anytime soon. Sweet. That was a solid discussion. Thank you, guys. We only have a handful of minutes left here, but Alex, if there are any questions from the audience that you want to toss over to our panelists, feel free.
Yeah, for sure. So the first one we got here from Nathan Sugarman, you guys can see it in the chat to it. It might be a little more relevant to Shawn, but Ben, it might be relevant if you are assigning reps to different teams or things like that. What involvement, Shawn, do you or the hiring team have in placing new SDRs on a specific like project or with a specific client?
Right. Yeah. And I think this will definitely be kind of unique to Demand Drive, right? Where, kind of like simplest terms, right? We're essentially almost like a middleman between kind of tech and software companies. So, we're hiring SDRs for various client programs, right? All different types of industries, verticals. So after kind of evaluating, right, and looking and offering and getting you guys, kind of accepted, right? So you guys accept an offer. That's actually when we begin. So we'll have ideas as we're going through the interview and evaluating you of like, hey, this could be a really good fit for this upcoming client program, right? Depending on industry, background, right? Maybe we have a client in the healthcare space. Maybe you have 3 to 5 years of working in the healthcare space, right? So having that comfortability and relatability as well. So Nathan, yeah, to specifically answer your question, a lot of it, so myself, the actual managers who do the interviews, and then also the resource allocation team. So we'll kind of brainstorm the candidates that we really like and want to offer regardless. And then we'll kind of come to those decisions and start doing kind of some of that mixing and matching based on background, what you've done previously. Maybe you've expressed an interest in a specific industry, like throughout the interview process. And then also, trying to match you up, best with the right manager for you as well, right? At Demand Drive, the management team is continuing to develop and grow internally as well. So we want to make sure that we have the right player coach matches as well. So there's a lot of kind of heads and brainstorming that go into it, but yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Nathan.
And I think, Ben, you can probably also chime in here in terms of like not just matching an SDR up with like a program, but maybe matching them up with a specific AE or team. I don't know how you break it up sort of internally there at SmartBear, but I know a lot of talk around like SDR AE alignment. It really has to do with like not just personality wise, but like how well you work together.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, the specific question is definitely more relevant to you guys. I didn't fully understand it first until starting to think of it from Demand Drive perspective. So it makes perfect sense now. Yeah, for us, we're broken up by product set. We have like 14 or 15 different products once you start breaking down suites and bundles. So no one is expected to know all of those when they first start. So realistically, where you get placed is based off the needs of the business and the amount of experience you have coming in. So we have a couple products that are longer sales cycle where you're not getting as many inbound leads. If someone's switching in from a role where maybe they have a year or two of experience, then we may put them in one of those roles, whereas someone coming fresh out of school, probably put them in a role that has some more inbound traffic to get them the practice and the repetition into having conversations, as well as if the learning curve for that product is a little less complex.
Nice. I like that. Yeah. I feel like, yeah, it can get pretty overwhelming. It's like drinking through a fire hose if you're a new SDR and it's like, here's 14 different products for you to learn.
Yeah.
You're like, no, thanks. I made a huge mistake.
Yeah, it's overwhelming for anyone, let alone someone who hasn't done it. So no, you're narrowed down to 2 to 3 products.
Alex, any other
juicy
questions we got?
Time for one more, couple minutes?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So, and you guys have touched on this a little bit, but who do you guys normally involve in the interview process? I know, Shawn, you mentioned having the managers in, but specifically, like, is it okay to have current SDRs or sales reps or AEs involved? Things like that.
Yeah, at Demand Drive, I know obviously kind of back like origins of Demand Drive, kind of like what I was talking about, where we had a very sporadic kind of interview process. So back in the good old days of Demand Drive, we had a lot of kind of just like SDRs or basically whoever was available to be. So now we actually have like designated interview teams here at Demand Drive where we think it's vital. And I think this just kind of goes to just kind of down the last question we talked about of just kind of like how like companies are evolving and like the future of kind of hiring SDRs. I think it's that collaborative style of like interviewing, right? And being able to get a bunch of different people's perspectives. So you'll have like 3, 4, 5 touch points at Demand Drive when you're going through the interview process of meeting those different individuals. So I think that's one thing that's really, really important, especially from our eyes, is the best way we're going to be able to evaluate and kind of determine, that kind of coachability, mixing and matching, kind of going back to Nathan's question, right, of matching up with the right program and whatnot. It all kind of comes down to, right, what the managers are going to see, right, the potential in you. They want to know what makes you guys tick. They want to get to know you, like, how you work, whether individually or within a team setting. They want you. So a lot of it is we want to get that management perspective at Demand Drive, because they're going to be the ones that are, kind of working alongside you, day by day, and are going to be the ones that are setting those day-to-day expectations for you. So if we can get that management perspective and looking through that scope and that lens, and kind of trying to determine essentially that potential of that candidate.
All right, Ben, you get the last word in here.
Ooh, excellent. Yeah, so for us, we do have, just Alex answered the two parts of the question. We do have a current SDR that is in the interview process, mainly for the benefit of the person interviewing, so that they can ask some more pointed question to someone who's actually doing the job day in and day out, as well as maybe some questions about what it's like to work for me or in the program, et cetera, to get some more honest answers there than me telling it how awesome it is to work on my team. So we've actually cut down the number of people that they interview with so it's typically me, my manager, and then an SDR. The reason being, we had started with doing it with more managers, and then when we debriefed, we would realize that we were pretty much always in alignment. So we actually cut that back because we promote so often from within that we have to be incredibly agile when we interview to make decisions like quickly, because we will promote within a whim when a seat opens up, and we got to backfill it as quickly as possible. So.
And just actually, just the last thing too, I guess I'll get the last word. So just like Ben just said too, and part of it too, just 95% of the managers, maybe even more at Demand Drive, right? So these ones that are doing the interviews, they were at one point in their career an SDR at Demand Drive. So I think that actually, so kind of, they were in that role at Demand Drive and have organically proven themselves and moved up the ladder at Demand Drive. So that's one thing that we pride ourselves on, is that organic natural growth within. So very rarely will you meet, a manager or someone in a senior leadership role at DD where, they're coming from an external source or, a different company beforehand.
Yeah, I think I'm going to get the last word in because I'm moderating this, so sorry guys. I think it's absolutely crucial that you're talking to someone who either is or used to be somewhat recently an SDR, because that's who's going to tell you better than them what it's like to be an SDR at that company, no matter where you are. You want to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. So I agree. I think you should involve them in the process. Maybe not make them, as involved as you can. You have a hiring manager for a reason, but they have valuable information to give you during that interview. So might as well use it. Sweet. We're over. I'm sorry for everyone for keeping you for a couple of minutes. But thank you, Ben and Shawn, for taking the time to talk with us today. I thought it was a valuable discussion for anyone hiring reps, or if you're looking to get hired. Either way, you're going to learn something. If people want to learn more about you or connect with you guys, can they find you on LinkedIn? What's the deal with that? Where can they find you?
Absolutely. LinkedIn, Shawn Harrison.
Yeah, definitely just hit me up on LinkedIn. We are hiring right now. I just saw someone's going to send me a resume. Have at it. But yeah, even if we're not hiring when you reach out, again, we promote so quickly and so often that even if we're not hiring today, we could be hiring next month. So definitely reach out. We do have a spot open right now, so would love to talk to anybody.
Yeah, we're actively hiring. I think we've actually, I've noticed a couple of people who are actually in our pipeline right now, kind of going through the interview process that we're here today. So thank you guys. But yeah, thank you to everyone here. But yeah, like Ben just said, feel free to reach out to me, connect me on LinkedIn, send me a message, doesn't matter.
Yeah, LinkedIn, smartbear.com. I'm guessing it's smartbear.com. I hope I didn't totally ruin it for you. Demanddrive.com. Check us out there. And thanks again for hopping on today. Really appreciate it. Hope you guys learned something. Thank you again, Shawn and Ben.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, guys.
All right, bye, everyone.